Excuse me, guys, are you guys together? Have you guys ever been divorced? Have you been divorced?
Have I been divorced?
Excuse me, have either of you ever been divorced? It might be sensitive because you're together.
Divorce. It's not just something that your parents constantly reassure you wasn't your fault, even when you're not asking. It's also something that's political, i.e. divorce laws. Who can get divorced? Who can't get divorced? Well, wait, what do you mean, can't get divorced? Is it a thing to want a divorce but not be able to get one? And what does that sound like to you? Does that sound like a curtailing of freedom? The idea of not being able to leave a marriage? Because some people think there are too many divorces, that divorce laws have gotten out of hand and we should go back to the old way. But what does that even mean? So there's something called no-fault divorce, as opposed to fault-based divorce.
Do you know what no-fault divorce is?
Yeah, it's like without a reason, right?
Right.
No-fault divorce is what you file when you just want to dissolve your marriage and you're not trying to assign blame to anyone. No one committed any mortal sins against your marriage. I mean, maybe they did, but you just want to move on, so you file no-fault divorce and let it be done. But for most of history, that has not been the case.
Do you think one person should be allowed to leave no matter what the other person thinks?
No. That's too free. It's too liberal. It's just too...
Up until the 1800s in England, it was basically impossible to get divorced. The law was such that a woman was, in a sense, property of the man, and you can imagine how that might affect one's autonomy. So actually, you had to get Parliament to approve divorces. Only about 10 were passed in Parliament each year, and they were available only to the very wealthy, because if you're rich, you can do whatever you want, and that's always been true. Now, in the US, divorce has always been left to the states, and going into the 19th century, grounds for divorce were expanding. This worried some people. In 1847, the Missouri Supreme Court noted that too great a facility in obtaining divorces is exceedingly injurious to the good morals and happiness of domestic life. Now, to many of us, divorce is just something you do when your first family finds out about your second family, and it's basically no big deal. But many people are still worried about the deleterious effects of divorce. Conservative commentators like Ben Shapiro and Tim Pool and Steven Crowder have all essentially blamed no-fault divorce for family breakdown.
Hi, this is the office of Congressman Adler.
Hi, I'm a constituent. Basically, I'm calling because my wife is trying to divorce me, and I'm just wondering what the congressman can do about that.
So unfortunately, we're only able to assist with federal agencies.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Of course. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
One person in the Washington Examiner frames the fact that your spouse can divorce you unilaterally as a violation of your constitutional rights. The 14th Amendment mandates that no person be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. But spouses sued for divorce have no right to their day in court. No weighing of evidence takes place. Only one spouse need allege, without proof or specificity, irreconcilable differences, or that the marriage has irrevocably broken down. Or Steven Crowder saying, "My then wife decided that she didn't want to be married anymore, and in the state of Texas, that is completely permitted." Now, the first no-fault divorce law was signed by Ronald Reagan in California in 1969.
What was the last state?
Last state, that was Idaho.
It's a good guess. It's actually New York. You know what year?
New York. 79.
2010.
No, that's not true.
But there are still obstacles to getting divorced. I recently sat down with Naomi Kahn, co-director of University of Virginia Law's Family Law Center, to get some clarification on this stuff.
No fault in most states does not mean that you just drive down to the court, say to the clerk, "I want a divorce," and you're divorced 2 minutes later. In some limited circumstances, in some states, it can be much quicker. But in many states, if not most states, there needs to be some waiting period. There needs to be some separation, or there needs to be a finding of irreconcilable differences before a divorce can be issued.
It depends on the state, but if you live in, say, Louisiana, you and your spouse must have lived separate and apart for 365 days if you have children 180 days if you don't.
What about waiting periods for getting a divorce?
You mean like you have to be separated for a year or something like that? I'm ambivalent on that, I would say.
If it's a mutual decision and there's no love lost, then there shouldn't be a wait list for it.
A waiting period could, if anything, if it's a high conflict divorce, it could make the conflict become even more extreme. Think about where there's violence, think about where there's another relationship, but it's very hard to do these studies. And so we don't really have great statistics on whether a waiting period would help.
Waiting periods are especially a thing in covenant marriages. What is a covenant marriage? People in a covenant marriage who want a divorce must go through marriage counseling and be separated for at least 18 months if they have underage children. In other cases, including those involving spousal or child abuse, couples in covenant marriages have to be separated for at least a year before a divorce can be granted.
If there's an abuse involved, I have 2 daughters, one is married, out. O-U-T out. Capital letters, out.
So that's in Louisiana, and covenant marriage is only in 3 states, and almost no one chooses that option. But some people love the idea. The Texas GOP recently added to its party platform, "We urge the legislature to rescind unilateral no-fault divorce laws, to support covenant marriage, and to pass legislation extending the period of time in which a divorce may occur to 6 months after the date of filing for divorce."
It's not binding. Very few people opt into the covenant marriage, but 3 states do have that as an option.
Steven Crowder also lays out this scenario. If a woman cheats on you, she leaves, she takes half.
Most states will divide something that they call either community property or marital property. And that, generally speaking, will be the property that was acquired by either spouse through the efforts of either spouse during the course of the marriage. In some states, there's a presumption of equal division. In most states, there is not. It's equitable, and equitable can mean that one spouse would get 70% of the assets and the other would get 30, but it's up to the court, or since about 95% of divorce cases settle, it's up to the people or to their attorneys doing the negotiation.
Who would actually be impacted by going back to a no-fault system?
There's been some evidence that the introduction of no-fault divorce has actually led to a reduction of female suicide.
That's right. In states that introduced unilateral divorce, we find an 8 to 16% decline in female suicide, roughly a 30% decline in domestic violence for both men and women, and a 10% decline in females murdered by their partners. Domestic violence appears to have declined by somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 between 1976 and 1985 in those states that reformed their divorce laws. So despite this available data and the massive inconvenience getting divorced already is, there are a number of legislators who are pushing for this. The Nebraska GOP has affirmed its belief that no-fault divorce should only be accessible to couples without children. Louisiana is debating whether to recommend the elimination of no-fault divorce. Senator from Ohio, J.D. Vance, said these marriages were fundamentally, they were maybe even violent, but certainly they were unhappy. And so getting rid of them and making it easier for people to shift spouses like they change their underwear, that's going to make people happier in the long term. And maybe it worked out for the moms and dads, though I'm skeptical. But it really didn't work out for the kids of those marriages. Now, I have seen no data supporting the idea that making it harder for people to get divorced helps anyone, and that maintaining some family unit, even though it's terribly acrimonious or maybe even violent, offers any benefit to the parents or the kids.
What if only one person doesn't want to be in that relationship anymore?
You can't force that person to stay in the relationship they don't want anymore. You can try as much as you want, but if that's their decision, you have to mutually respect that person's decision. If they don't want to be with you anymore, you can't force them.
Historically, stricter divorce laws haven't even done a great job of keeping people from getting divorced. In the 1850s, Indiana was known as a divorce mill because of its lax divorce laws, so they ended up dealing with what they called migratory divorce. And so the thing here is that most divorces are mutually agreed upon, so couples just figure out how to make it happen. Couples often colluded to attain a divorce the state did not want them to have, and divorce became increasingly easy to obtain. Collusion was the norm. For example, in New York, you could only get a divorce on grounds of adultery. So an entire cottage industry had developed to fabricate evidence of adultery that could be used in divorce court. Okay, now, despite there certainly being people in power and even federally who seem unhappy with divorce laws as they stand, this is, right now, not a top concern for lawmakers. This still seems pretty fringe, although you never know how things can change. And to my knowledge, no presidential candidate has mentioned this. But if they have and I'm wrong, leave a comment down below. If you had any thoughts on this at all, leave a comment. If you didn't like my hair, leave a comment. Share, subscribe to Breaking Points so you don't miss videos like this. I also have a personal YouTube channel that will be linked below in the description. Thank you to Breaking Points. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.